I was 34 years old the week I learned that my mother had been running a tab on me since 1994, and that the balance due, as of Christmas dinner said aloud in front of 11 relatives and a spiral-cut ham, was $98,000. That was the number. $98,000. For a wedding I was not in. For a venue I had not chosen. For a marriage I was not consulted on. And the alternative she offered, with the same tone she used to tell me dinner was ready, was that she would cut me off entirely. From the family. From my father's memory. From the thing she called love. She said it like it was reasonable. That is what this story is about. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and families learn, sometimes too late, that boundaries have a price. If you've ever been the one who showed up, paid up, and absorbed the hit while someone else was called the favorite, you already know this channel. Stay with me. Drop a comment. Subscribe. This one is going to take a minute to unfold, and it's going to be worth every second. I'm a forensic accountant. I've been one for 11 years. What that means, in practical terms, is that I spend my days finding the money that people have decided does not exist. Hidden assets in divorce proceedings. Embezzlement buried in 3 layers of shell LLCs. Trusts restructured to look like gifts. Gifts restructured to look like nothing at all. I am trained professionally and constitutionally to follow numbers backward through time until they tell me the truth. Numbers do not lie. They don't get defensive. They don't cry at the table. They simply are what they are. My name is not relevant. What is relevant is that I am the older daughter in a family of 2, that I spent the first 34 years of my life believing that being useful was the same as being loved, and that I kept meticulous records without ever intending to use them. My father built a modest life. He was a mechanical engineer for 26 years, drove the same truck for 14, coached my soccer team until I aged out, and fell asleep in his recliner with the financial news on every Thursday night. He was not a demonstrative man. He showed love the way his generation did, through being there, through keeping the heat on, through sitting at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. when I was 16 and afraid and doing algebra I didn't understand. He was present. Consistently, reliably, actually present. My mother is different. My mother is a woman who experiences life as an audience sport. She requires witnesses. Her happiness needs to be seen to count, and her grief requires the same. She is not cruel in the way that movies make cruelty. She is cruel the way weather is cruel, not intentionally but comprehensively, and without any awareness of the damage she leaves. My sister Danielle is 6 years younger than me, and she has always been my mother's reflection. Same laugh, same hair, same talent for walking into a room and becoming the temperature of it. I was my father's daughter, which meant I was useful, dependable, and slightly invisible. I paid for things. I fixed things. I showed up. When my parents' furnace died the winter of 2019, I wrote the check. When my mother's car needed tires 2 Januaries in a row, I handled it. Not because anyone asked in a way that left room for refusal. Because the ask came wrapped in the assumption that I would, and I had not yet learned to unwrap assumptions before accepting them. This is what I mean when I say the family ran an emotional arithmetic on me, without my full awareness, for most of my adult life. Every payment I made was filed under love. Every absence I covered was filed under family. I didn't have a ledger yet. I was working from memory. That was my first mistake. My father died on a Tuesday in February, 14 months before Christmas dinner. I won't spend a lot of time on what the grief felt like, because I'm not sure I have language that isn't insufficient. I will tell you that the Tuesday it happened, I drove to my parents' house, let myself in with my key, sat at the kitchen table for 45 minutes before my mother came downstairs, and then spent the next 4 hours on the phone with the hospital, the funeral home, and his attorney's office while my mother sat in the living room and my sister cried in the guest bedroom. I made lists. It's what I do when I cannot do anything else. I made lists of what needed to be handled, in what order, by when. I called the people. I signed what needed signing. I scheduled what needed scheduling. My mother told the pastor I had stepped up beautifully. She said it like I was a new employee who had impressed on her first shift. The months after that settled into a pattern. My mother called. I came. Danielle sent texts with hearts in them. I sent checks when the texts weren't sufficient. I watched my sister begin dating a man named Preston, a name I have never fully trusted on principle, within 4 months of my father's death. By month 9 they were engaged. By month 11 the wedding date was set. By month 12 the venue was booked. A venue that costs, I would later verify, $19,000 for the space alone. I was not involved in any of these decisions. I was not asked. I was informed by text, after the venue deposit had cleared. The first time Danielle mentioned the wedding budget to me directly, it was October. We were at my mother's kitchen table, a table I had paid to have refinished the previous spring. She pushed a binder across the surface, a white binder, tabbed laminated cover, and said with the enthusiasm of someone who had rehearsed this, "I want to show you what we're thinking." The binder contained 112 pages. I turned the pages slowly. I am a person who reads the full document before reacting. This is both a professional habit and, on this occasion, the thing that kept me from saying something I could not take back. By page 47, I understood that the total projected cost was $98,400. By page 61, I understood that Preston's family was contributing $12,000. By page 89, I understood that my mother had contributed a notation, in her own handwriting, next to the remaining balance. "Marin will handle this." My name, in ink, next to $86,400 and whatever was left over. I closed the binder. I said, "I'll need to think about it." Danielle blinked. This was not the response she had been given to expect. That night I took a photo of page 89. I dated it. I filed it in a folder I had already created months before called Family to Review. Christmas dinner was December 23rd, which my mother calls Christmas dinner, even when it is not Christmas, because she prefers the word Christmas to the word Tuesday. There were 11 of us. My mother, my sister, Preston, my aunt and uncle, 2 cousins, Preston's parents, and a family friend named Carl who had been attending holidays at my mother's table since I was 9 and apparently had nowhere else to go. The dinner was good. My mother is a genuinely talented cook, and she exercises this talent with the focus of someone demonstrating a skill they'd like appraised. The ham was good. The potatoes were good. The wine was a bottle I had brought because I always brought the wine. We were 45 minutes into dessert when my mother set down her fork, placed her hands flat on the table, a gesture I now recognize as her version of calling the room to order, and said with warmth, with affection, with the voice she used to read my kindergarten report cards aloud to relatives, "I think it's time we talked about the wedding." There was a beat of enthusiastic nodding around the table. And then, looking directly at me, she said, "Marin, we need you to cover the remaining balance. 86,400. I know that's a big number, but family is family. And honestly, with what your father left, it's the right thing to do." She paused. She smiled. "And if you're not going to be a part of this family the way we need you to be, then I'm not sure what we're doing here." The table went quiet in the specific way that tables go quiet when someone has said something that cannot be unsaid. I picked up my dessert fork. I finished the bite on it. I set it down. I said, "Tell me what you mean by cut off." My mother said she meant exactly what she'd said. She meant holidays. She meant phone calls. She meant connection. She said the family needed to know where I stood. Preston's father looked at the centerpiece. Carl studied his cobbler. My aunt's face had gone the careful blank of a woman who had been at enough of these dinners to know when to become scenery. I said, "I'll need to review a few things first. We can talk after the new year." My mother said that she hoped I would think very carefully. I said that I always did. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table. I opened the folder called Family to Review. I added a new document. I dated it December 23rd, 8:47 p.m. I wrote down verbatim what my mother had said, and what I had said in return. Then I opened a second folder that I had been building slowly and without urgency, for 11 months. The folder was called Estate, Dad. My father's attorney called me in late January, 2 weeks after the funeral, and asked if I could come in. I told him I had assumed there would be a family meeting. He said there would be. But first he wanted to speak with me privately, as the named executor of my father's estate. I had not known I was the named executor. I drove to his office on a Wednesday morning and sat across from a man named Theodore, who had represented my father for 19 years and who had the particular stillness of someone who has delivered life-altering information enough times to understand that the delivery is not the point. He slid a folder across the desk. The primary document was the will, finalized and witnessed in March of 2021, 11 months before my father's death. I read it twice before I let myself look up. My father had left the house to my mother for her lifetime, with reversion to both daughters equally on her death. He had left his retirement accounts, the IRAs, the 401k, the brokerage, with named beneficiaries. He had updated those beneficiaries in March of 2021. I was the primary beneficiary on every account. Danielle was named contingent on 2 of them. Not all. The total value of the liquid accounts at time of death was $412,000. Theodore let me sit with that for a moment. Then he said, "There's a secondary document." He slid a second folder across the desk. Inside was a promissory note, dated September of 2019, signed by my mother and witnessed by Theodore himself. In it, my mother acknowledged receipt of $62,000 from my father's personal savings, designated as advance inheritance for Danielle to cover graduate school costs, and committed in writing to disclosing this to both daughters as part of any future estate planning conversation. She had never mentioned it. Not once. I read the promissory note twice. Then I read it a third time. $62,000. Already paid. Already spent. Already received. Theodore said. He wanted you to have the full picture. I asked Theodore how long he had been holding this. He said since March of 2021. I asked if he knew why my father had decided to formalize it. Theodore looked at a point slightly above my head, the way people do when they are choosing their words, and said only. He said he wanted the accounting to be clear. I understood what that meant. My father counted things too. Theodore mentioned one more item. A sealed letter, to be given to the executor upon distribution. To me. He slid it across the desk. I didn't open it in the office. I put it in my bag. I drove to a parking lot 3 blocks away and sat with the engine off and the heat running, and opened it. It was 1 page, handwritten, dated 2 weeks before his diagnosis. I won't recite all of it here. But the line that I have folded and unfolded so many times that the paper now comes apart at the creases like a map read by someone who got lost, that line read, "You always made sure everyone had enough. I want to make sure you have enough too. Don't let them tell you what that's worth." I read it 3 times. Then I put it back in the envelope. Then I started the car and drove home. I did not act yet. I read everything 3 times. That is the job. The week after Christmas dinner, Danielle called. Then Preston called. Then my mother called twice and then sent a text that said we really need to sit down with an emoji I will not describe. Then on a Saturday afternoon in late January, my mother appeared at my door. I let her in. I made tea. I sat across from her at my table, not my father's table, my table in my apartment that I had bought with my own salary, and I let her talk. She talked about the wedding. She talked about what it meant to the family. She talked about how my father would have wanted this, a phrase I had now heard 17 times in 11 months and which I had begun to mark mentally each time it appeared. She talked about how much Danielle needed me. She talked about how family money should stay in the family. She said, with the particular confidence of someone who has never had to produce a document, "Your father put aside money for exactly this kind of thing." I asked one question. I said, "When did he tell you that?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out for a moment. Then she said he had always intended to provide for the girls. I said, "Do you remember the promissory note you signed in September 2019? The temperature in the room changed. She said she didn't know what I was referring to. I said, "The one in front of Theodore. For $62,000. She picked up her tea. She did not drink from it. She said those funds were for Danielle's education and that was different. I said, "I know." I did not say anything else. After a moment I said I would be in touch and that she should feel free to let herself out. I walked to my home office. I heard the door close. I called Theodore's office and left a message that said, "You can send the letters. If you've ever watched someone count your money before you've decided to give it, you already understand exactly where this is going. And if you've ever held a piece of paper that quietly restructures everything, you know that the moment it crosses your hands, the clock starts. Stay with me. If this kind of story documents dignity and the specific silence of a room that has just understood what it said, is the kind of thing that finds you, subscribe. I'll be here." My mother called the family gathering on the second Saturday in February, which she announced in a group text as a time to come together around the wedding. Preston's parents were included. Carl was included. My aunt and uncle were included. I was included. I confirmed that I would attend. I prepared one folder. Gray letter size elastic closure. Inside, a copy of the will tabbed. The promissory note tabbed. A 4-page summary I had prepared myself, in the format I use for litigation support, which laid out in plain columns the following: assets distributed, assets pre-distributed, value at date of each transaction, and current requested contribution versus previously distributed funds. At the bottom of the last page, one line, no commentary. Remaining equalization required to reach parity, $0. I also brought my father's letter, in its original envelope, with his handwriting on the outside. I arrived at my mother's house on time, which for my family means 6 minutes early. The living room had been arranged for an occasion. The good throw pillows were out, which meant my mother had spent part of the morning staging. Preston and Danielle were on the couch. Preston's parents, Gary and Linda, sat in the chairs near the window. My aunt and uncle were at the ends. Carl was in his usual chair by the radiator, nursing a glass of something amber. My mother stood when I came in, which she almost never does. She said, "We're so glad you're here. I know this hasn't been easy." I said, "Thank you for having me." I sat down. I placed the folder on my knee. My mother made a small speech. She talked about the wedding, about family, about legacy, about what my father would have wanted. She turned to Danielle and said how much this meant to her future. She said that in families, sometimes the ones who are more established help the ones who are still building, and that this was not a burden but an honor, a sign of how strong we were together. Danielle was holding Preston's hand. She looked at me with an expression that was partly hope and partly the particular unease of someone who suspects the audience knows something the performers don't. My mother said, "Maren, we're hoping you're ready to commit today. The venue needs the deposit confirmed by the 15th. There was a small, expectant silence. I said, "Can I have the floor for a few minutes?" My mother said, "Of course." She said it warmly because she thought I was capitulating. I opened the folder. I said, "I want to walk through some documents, because I think there's information that not everyone here has seen. I'm going to be straightforward, and I'm going to be brief." I held up the first document, the will. I said, "My father updated his beneficiary designations in March of 2021. I am the primary named beneficiary on his retirement accounts and brokerage. The total value is $412,000. That is mine, legally and by his explicit designation. That is not family money. That is money he chose to leave to me." Gary, Preston's father, shifted in his chair. I held up the second document, the promissory note. I said, "In September 2019, my mother signed a promissory note in front of my father's attorney acknowledging receipt of $62,000 from my father's savings, earmarked as advance inheritance for Danielle. This was disclosed to me by Theodore's office as part of the estate process. Mom, you signed this. It has your signature and a witness line." Danielle turned to my mother. My mother said that those were two completely separate things. I said yes, they are. Which is why I made a summary. I held up the 4-page document. If you'd like to review it, I've laid out what Danielle has already received in advance against what the estate distributed, and what equalization, if any, would be appropriate. The math on the last page is straightforward. I can leave a copy. My aunt looked at my uncle. My uncle looked at his shoes. Danielle said quietly, "Mom, you said that money was from Grandma." My mother said it was complicated. Preston said, with the particular aggression of someone who has been rehearsed, "Marin, this is a family matter. With all due respect, your father is gone, and that money should stay in the family." I said, "It is in the family. It's mine." My mother stood up. Her voice climbed. She said I was being cruel. She said I was doing this to hurt Danielle. She said my father would be ashamed. I waited. When the room was quiet, I reached into the back of the folder and took out the envelope. I didn't open it. I placed it on the coffee table. I said, "He wrote me a letter. I've read it many times. There's one sentence in it that I'd like to read to you, because I think it's relevant." I took out the letter. I found the line. I read it aloud. "Don't let them tell you what that's worth." I put the letter back. Carl set down his glass. He didn't say anything, but he set it down very deliberately, and he looked at my mother with an expression that she did not look back at. My aunt said quietly, "Eleanor." That was all. Just my mother's name. But she said it in the voice you use when you are telling someone to stop. My mother said I was reinterpreting a private letter to serve my own interests. I said, "He left it for me. Not for interpretation. For instruction." I stood up, picked up my folder. I said, "I love Danielle. I hope her wedding is everything she wants. I will not be contributing to it financially, for reasons that are now fully documented. I'm going to go." I looked at Danielle, not at Preston. "And my sister." I said, "He left the letter for me, but the $62,000 is in your degree. He paid for both of us. He just did it differently." I walked to the door. I turned back once. I said, to no one in particular, "The promissory note is on page 2. Then I left. Theodore finalized the estate distribution in April. The retirement and brokerage accounts transferred cleanly into my name. $412,000 less taxes, less fees. I am a forensic accountant. I understood the tax implications before the money moved. I had already spoken to my own financial advisor. Nothing about it surprised me. The numbers simply became what they had always been. My mother did not speak to me for 3 months after the February meeting. Then she called on a Tuesday in May and said she thought we should find a way forward. She did not apologize. She said she had been processing a lot and that she hoped I could understand. I said I did understand. I said I thought it was important to have clear agreements going forward, and that I would not be contributing to major family expenses without being consulted first. She said she supposed that was fair. She has not offered to cut me off again. I do not believe she will. Danielle and Preston scaled the wedding back to a venue that cost $9,000 and a guest list of 40 people. I attended. It was, without the architecture of obligation, genuinely lovely. She looked like herself. Preston behaved. My mother cried in the correct direction. I drank the champagne they served, which was fine, and danced once, to a song my father would have recognized, and sat down. At the reception, Danielle found me at my table during cocktail hour. She stood next to me for a moment before she spoke. Then she said, "I didn't know about the $62,000. I want you to know that." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry it was like that." I said, "Me too." We didn't hug. We're not huggers. But she stayed standing next to me for another minute before she went back to the room, and I think that was its own language. Carl called me in June. He said he had been at a lot of those dinners over the years and that he had never, as he put it, seen somebody read a room like that and say less. He said my father would have found it funny. I thanked him. He said he was coming for Thanksgiving if that was all right. I said the door was open. I used a portion of my father's accounts to establish a scholarship fund at the university he attended, in his name, for students in engineering programs who demonstrate financial need and are the first in their family to pursue the degree. It is not large. It is recurring. It is in his name, and the people who receive it will never know who he was, but they will have, for 1 year at least, a little more room to breathe. I kept the letter. It is in a document sleeve in an archival folder stored flat the way you store things you intend to keep for a long time. I do not need to read it anymore. I know what it says. The folder called Family, to review is still on my desktop. I haven't deleted it. I update it when something relevant happens. Probably I will update it less and less, and one day I will move it to archive, and that will mean something, though I am not sure yet what. Here is what I know. For most of my adult life I confused being needed with being valued, and I paid the difference out of my own account without keeping receipts. And then someone handed me a letter that said don't let them tell you what that's worth, and I understood that the same skills I used to find hidden money in corporate litigation could be used to find hidden arithmetic in my own life. The numbers had been there the whole time. I just hadn't looked. My father counted things. So do I. That, it turned out, was inheritance enough. If this reminded you that the people who show up the most quietly are sometimes the ones carrying the most weight, and that there is a difference between what a family asks and what you've agreed to give, take that. Sit with it. Update whatever needs updating. The people who loved you well left you something worth protecting. You're allowed to protect it. If you're here for these stories, drop a comment below and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.